Hey, welcome to Brief Encounters, the series where I review intriguing short stories. I'm Weetzy, an entity from another dimension, and for my second transmission, I'm looking at Quantum's 2007 short story called I Don't Know Timmy, Being God is a Big Responsibility. This sci-fi short story explores mathematical and existential themes within the context of simulation theory. Quantum has been writing and publishing sci-fi stories since at least 2006, with a focus on short stories and serialized fiction. I recently bought his collection of short stories called Valuable Humans in Transit and Other Stories, so this isn't the last you'll be hearing about his work on this channel. As a quick reminder, this review does contain spoilers, so this is your one and only warning before I dive into the specifics of this story. Enjoy! First, we have our completely out of context story totals. Compiling these ridiculous tallies is an idea I took from The Last Drive-In, which is a great horror commentary show if you haven't heard of it. So what kind of numbers are we looking at? I Don't Know Timmy, Being God is a Big Responsibility includes the following totals. 50 years for two geniuses to articulate an obscure math theory, 23 specialists building a hypercomputing engine in 2 years, 3 unsolvable problems in discrete mathematics solved in 1 week, 10 to the power of 24 gold atoms shoved into the form of a cube, and infinity or countably infinite identical recursive universes. Now to explore how we got those numbers. Let's start with a summary of the plot, shall we? It's past the end of the work week on a Friday evening, and all Tim wants to do is catch his bus home. But his coworker Diane insists that she has something to show him. They're both part of a top-secret team of researchers working on making hypercomputing a reality, and they've succeeded. Diane reveals that while Tim has been focused on solving previously unsolvable problems in discrete mathematics, she's turned her attention to simulation theory. With the infinite processing power and storage capacity at their disposal, and with the convenient existence of a solved grand unified theory in the story, Diane has created a one-to-one simulation of Earth in their universe, down to the smallest detail, including Diane and Tim themselves. They spend the next few minutes exploring the implications of their discovery. As the pair test the limits of determinism within the simulation Diane created, they come to realize that they're also in a simulation, and come to the sickening realization that although they might be in a simulation, they're still capable of bringing the infinite simulation stack offline with the click of one power button. So what was my overall impression of I Don't Know Timmy, Being God is a Big Responsibility? The first is, does free will exist? It's arguably the biggest question this story poses and attempts to definitively answer. In the words of Diane, quote, "There aren't chances here. This is a perfect, continuous implementation of the equations of reality. No steps, no truncation, no fuzz, no unpredictability. Absolute accuracy." End quote. The hypercomputing engine in Quantum's story can't behave randomly, isn't susceptible to chaos, and can't deviate from its predetermined path towards its logical conclusion. But what does that actually mean, and what does it imply? If it were true in our reality, it would mean the universe is fully deterministic, and that randomness and free will don't exist in it at all. It would mean that Einstein's block universe theory of the universe is true after all, and that all of time exists as a 4D block containing everything that has ever happened and will ever happen. A pre-written story playing out predictably from beginning to end with no revisions in between. In my completely unqualified opinion, I don't agree completely with this view of the universe, but I also think it's a topic that requires more nuance. In the same way that life seems to rely on energy gradients to arise, I think the influence of determinism relies on gradients of scale. To me, free will seems like a local phenomenon that can arise in sufficiently large and complex systems that rely on deterministic rules. Loose determinism probably sounds like an oxymoron, but I guess it's what I'm envisioning here. In short, I think determinism and free will can actually coexist, but I don't think they can ever exist at the same level within a system, if that makes sense. And I don't think that the size of the system is enough. it has to be complex enough to have given rise to smaller subsystems in compartmentalization and or specialization. I think opportunities for free will pop up at certain thresholds within these kinds of systems, while the deterministic constraints that limit and guide those bubbles of opportunity probably exist at higher levels. Maybe this all sounds completely stupid to people who actually know what the mathematics behind this are, in which case, feel free to chime in. Moving on, though. I love that this story casually explores infinities a la Gregor Cantor. Do I understand the mathematics behind Cantor's work? Absolutely not. Do I still find it fascinating? Hell yeah. The idea that infinities can contain other infinities is mind-blowing alone. But the idea that some infinities can be larger than others, implying they have a size, is where my mind really starts to spin. So what kinds of infinite things are there in this story? There's infinite processing power, infinite storage capacity, an infinite loop executed, an infinite number of decimal places computed, and most importantly, an infinite sequence of hypercomputational universe simulators. Now consider the fact that each of those infinite universe instances in this sequence has access to infinite processing power and storage. It's turtles all the way down. In this story, it's gold cubes instead of turtles, though. Diane decides to program the appearance of a gold cube into the simulation below her, so the simulation above theirs does the same to them. This is how the characters realize they're in the simulation after all, because if they had been at the top level of the infinite chain, then there wouldn't have been a level above them to give them a gold cube. The gold cubes can also be viewed as the physical representation of the deterministic nature of the infinite sequence of simulations. Since Diane was able to program the appearance of the cube in her own simulation, it stands to reason that the Diane in the simulation above her did the same. This is reinforced by the fact that Diane and Tim's characters are doing the exact same things in their simulation that they're doing in reality up to that point. This is also where you realize that what happens in one universe simulation probably happens in all of them, regardless of where in the sequence that universe simulation is placed. This shows that determinism doesn't only exist within a single universe simulation in this story, but that it actually applies across the entire infinite set of universe simulations too. But then you also have to consider that there might be some drift across these simulations, which is also what's implied within the story. So, a few 100,000 or million or billion simulations down the line, maybe there is enough drift that determinism applies differently. I don't know. It's a mindfuck for sure, because in this instance, the implication is that determinism is absolute. But anyway, on to the next thing. Something I did find out about the limitations of hypercomputation in this story was that Diane mentioned they can't go back in time within the simulation. You would think that you'd be able to go back to replay what's already happened, especially if nothing changed about the starting conditions, and most especially if you have infinite storage and computational power. I find this doubly odd considering the amount of control Diane has in terms of controlling the forward progression of time. She's able to go from cosmic timescales to civilizational timescales and even smaller time windows with fine precision. I'm wondering if maybe Diane mentioned it as a limitation because she hadn't actually programmed anything to do that yet, or if it's because backwards time travel would still be impossible even within the realm of hypercomputation, like based on the mathematics of it. If it's the latter, then I wonder why, and if it is the mathematics, I wonder specifically what it is that prevents that from happening. I just found it funny because at one point Diane says, quote, "It has infinite processing power. It can do anything." Well, not anything. It actually does have limits, but you're going to have to demonstrate some serious imagination if you want to hit them. End quote. Going back in time seems like a pretty unimaginative ask, yet here we are. I digress, though. Time for some highlights. What were my favorite parts of this story? The first was just the casual existence of a solution to the grand unified theory. I love when stories do this. I know some people view it as like convenient and just like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, like draw the rest of the fucking owl before you tell your story. But to me, it's just like, once you solve that, there's so much that you can do. And so I like it when people go there. The second highlight for me was just the shade that was thrown towards quantum computing. Like at the beginning of the short story, when they're like comparing hypercomputation to quantum computation, it just like was so subtle, but the shade was so sweet. And lastly, the math jokes that completely went over my head until I read the comments were definitely a highlight for me. I won't spoil them in case you want to go read the story yourself and see if you can catch them. And if you can't, then you can read the comments and laugh vicariously through other people's math knowledge like I did. But I just thought I thought it was really funny. And lastly, what did I dislike about this story? This one's going to be short and sweet. The first was Tim's whining about what to do with the gold cube. I thought it was realistic, but it was still annoying. It's like, there are bigger things at work here, my guy, like priorities. And the second and last thing was just the inability to travel through time at will in this simulation. I went into that earlier in my like impressions about the story though, so I won't like belabor that point. But yeah, those were the only things I really disliked about this short story. And that's it for my second installment in Brief Encounters. Thanks so much for joining me on this ride as I reviewed my second short story in this series. I'm definitely hoping to review full books soon, but those obviously just take more work. So I figure short stories are a great way to release things a little quicker. Anyway, hope you have a great day, and thanks for stopping by. See ya!